What would you do if a little boy pressed a torn piece of paper into your hand and whispered a phone number? And when you called it, the man who answered said your name before you gave it? It was 20 minutes before closing when Laura Voss walked out the back door of Whitmore General's laundry annex with detergent burns on her wrists and $7 in her coat pocket. Not her coat, technically. The coat belonged to the lost and found bin she'd been raiding since October, when the heating in her studio apartment finally gave out and the landlord stopped answering texts. She was not supposed to still be at the hospital. Her shift had ended at 9, but the new supervisor, a man named Briggs who wore his lanyard like a medal, had docked her pay for leaving 2 minutes early on Thursday, and so tonight she had stayed until the last cart was folded and the last drain was cleared, because $7 was not enough to lose any more of. The parking lot behind the annex was the kind of place hospitals put things they didn't want patients to see. Dumpsters, utility vans, a chain-link fence with a gap at the bottom that raccoons and, apparently, at least one small boy used on a regular basis. She almost missed him. She would have if she hadn't stopped to retie her left shoe beneath the sodium light near the fence. She crouched, and that's when she saw the shape against the dumpster. Small, still, too still for a Tuesday night in November in Baltimore. Laura crossed the lot in 8 steps. He was maybe 6 years old. Dark hair matted against his forehead, face pale enough that the shadows under his eyes looked painted on. He wore a dress shirt, a real one with buttons the kind children wore to funerals or court appearances, and one shoe. The other foot was bare against the asphalt, and his toes had gone the color of old wax. She dropped to her knees. Hey, sweetheart. His eyes opened. Brown, glassy, confused in the way that children got when sleep and cold had been fighting over them for too long. Are you hurt? He shook his head very slightly. Then he reached into his breast pocket, a 6-year-old with a breast pocket, she thought, which told her something, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases were soft as cloth. He held it out to her. One phone number, no name, written in the careful block letters of a child who had practiced it until it lived in his hands. Is this your dad? She asked. He nodded once. His lips moved. She leaned closer. He said, the boy whispered, if I was ever lost, call. Laura looked at the paper, then at the parking lot around her empty except for a security guard making slow rounds near the far entrance, then back at the boy, who was shivering now with the particular violence of a small body that had run out of warmth to spend. Every reasonable part of her said to bring him inside, find a nurse, call the police, hand him to a system built to handle exactly this situation. Walk away from a number written on a piece of paper by a 6-year-old in a dress shirt with one shoe. She pulled out her phone. She dialed. It rang twice. Then a man's voice, low and very awake for nearly 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. Who is this? Not a question, a demand dressed as one. Laura's throat tightened. I found a little boy behind Whitmore General. He gave me this number. Silence. The kind that had weight. Describe him. Dark hair, dress shirt, one shoe. He's maybe 6, he's cold. The sound that came through the phone was not a word. It was a breath pulled inward so sharply it could have been the beginning of something terrible. Then, is he breathing? Yes, he's conscious. He's looking at me right now. What is your name? She hesitated. The boy was watching her with those glassy eyes, and his hand had found her sleeve, and she felt the cold of his fingers through her coat. Laura Voss, Laura Voss. The man repeated it as if filing it somewhere permanent. My name is Dorian Call. The boy's name is Matteo. Keep him warm. Keep him awake. Do not bring him inside the hospital. Her pulse jumped. He needs to be looked at, not inside that building. The voice had not risen. It was somehow more dangerous for staying level. I have a doctor. I am 4 minutes away. Tell Matteo his father is coming. The call ended. Laura stared at the screen, then at the boy, at Matteo, who was still watching her. Your dad is coming, she said. 4 minutes. Something shifted in his face. Not relief exactly. More like a knot loosening that had been pulled very tight for a very long time. He leaned forward against her arm with the complete faith of a child who had decided she was safe, and Laura held him there in the parking lot, her knees going numb against the asphalt, her heart beating in a way she couldn't quite account for. He came in three black cars, no sirens, no markings, just the low sound of expensive engines moving fast and a kind of authority that didn't need headlights to announce itself. They pulled into the service entrance like they had a right to it. Maybe they did. The first man out was broad and silent with a scar across his chin and the eyes of someone who counted exits before he counted people. He saw Laura and Matteo and his hand moved near his jacket, then stilled. The second car's door opened. Dorian Call was tall in the way that some men were tall, not just in height but in the space they occupied. He wore a dark overcoat, no tie, and the look of a man who had not slept in longer than one night. His face was the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now something harder. Controlled, like a room that had been cleaned after something went wrong inside it. He crossed the lot and didn't look at Lara first. He looked at Mateo, and then he stopped being whatever the rest of him was. He dropped to one knee on the asphalt, this man who clearly did not kneel for anything, and he put both hands on the boy's face with a gentleness that had no place in the rest of his presentation. Mateo, the boy broke. 6 years of careful composure collapsed all at once, and he started crying the ugly, relieved way that children cried when the fear was finally allowed out. He grabbed his father by the lapels and buried his face in his neck, and Dorian Call wrapped both arms around him and closed his eyes and held on. Lara looked away because watching it felt like reading someone's private mail. When she looked back, Dorian was standing with Mateo in his arms. The boy's legs were wrapped around him, face still buried, hands fisted in his collar. Dorian looked at Lara. His eyes were a dark gray-green, not warm, but not cold either in that moment. Something else. Something she didn't have a word for. "You called," he said. "He asked me to. Most people wouldn't have." She didn't answer that because she didn't know what to do with it. "He needs to be examined," she said instead. "He was out here at least 40 minutes, his core temperature. My physician is in the car." That's not the same. As a proper boss. Not threatening, just needs. And I am aware of what certain hospitals report to certain people. Tonight those two facts are in conflict. She looked at him, then at Mateo, who had turned his head just enough to see her, one eye visible over his father's shoulder. Lara said, "Is he going to be all right?" Dorian looked at his son. Something crossed his face that she suspected he would have hidden if he'd remembered she was watching. "He will be," he said, "because of you." She stood in the parking lot as the cars pulled away. Her knees hurt. Her hands still smelled like industrial detergent. The piece of paper with the phone number was still in her left hand. She should have let it go. She had done a good thing. She could walk to the bus stop and ride home to her cold apartment and heat a can of soup and not think about Dorian Call or what a 6-year-old in a dress shirt was doing alone behind a hospital at 10 o'clock. Instead, she stood there until the last taillight disappeared. 3 days later, she was called into her supervisor's office. Briggs sat behind his desk with his lanyard and his expression of a man delivering news he'd been looking forward to. Lara's hours were being reduced, effective immediately. 4 shifts to 2. Budget reasons, he said. Restructuring, nothing personal. She looked at the forms he slid across the desk and did the math in her head in the time it took her to pick up the pen. 2 shifts a week was not rent, was not the credit card bill from when she'd taken her mother to the ER in February. Was not the gap her ex-boyfriend had left in her bank account along with everything else he'd taken when he decided she wasn't useful anymore. "There must be a mistake," she said. Briggs smiled the way men smiled when they wanted you to feel the power dynamic and pretend you didn't. "These things happen. Economy." She thought about asking if it was related to the overtime complaint she'd filed last month. She thought about asking a lot of things. Instead, she signed the form because she still needed 2 shifts. The bus home was late. It was always late. She stood at the stop in the dark with her hands in her pockets and her jaw set in the way she'd learned to set it when she needed to keep crying until she was somewhere private. She didn't cry. She didn't often. A car pulled to the curb, black, unremarkable from the outside, the kind of car that was meant to be unremarkable. The window came down. The man in the passenger seat was the broad one with the scar, the one from the parking lot. "Mrs. Voss," he said. "I'm Crane. Mr. Call would like to speak with you." She stared at him. "How did you find me?" "We are very good at finding people." He said it without apology. "You can say no. He will not send anyone else, but he asks that you consider it." She looked down the empty street. The bus schedule on the shelter said 7 minutes. It would be 15. She got in the car. The building they brought her to was in Fells Point, 4 stories of brick that looked like a converted warehouse and probably was. No visible signage, a gate that required 3 separate authorizations to open. Inside, the lobby was warm and quiet in the way that money made things quiet. Dorian Call was waiting in what she could only describe as a study, though it was larger than her apartment. Books, a desk, a fireplace that was actually burning wood and not gas. He stood when she came in. Mateo was on the sofa with a blanket and a book, looking considerably better than the parking lot version of himself. He saw Lara and his face opened like a window. "You came," he said. "I came." She looked at him carefully. Color in his cheeks, both shoes. "How do you feel?" "Better. Dr. Falk said I was very strong." He said it with the pride of a child who had been told something once and intended to carry it forever. Dorian said, "Mateo, give us a minute." The boy slid off the sofa without complaint, paused to touch Lara's arm as he passed, the lightest touch, just fingertips, and disappeared through a door at the far end of the room. The room changed when he left it. Dorian Call looked at her the way she had seen doctors look at X-rays, assessing. Not unkind, but thorough. "Sit," he said. "I'd rather stand." He accepted that. "Then I'll be direct. Mateo spoke about you for 2 days. He wanted me to find you. I would have found you regardless, but something moved in his expression. He made it a matter of some urgency." Lara's chest felt strange. "He's 6. He is very particular about people he trusts. It doesn't happen often." Dorian looked at the fire. It didn't happen at all after his mother. She waited. "Elena died when Mateo was 3, he said in the tone of a man who had said the sentence enough times to say it cleanly. "A car accident, the kind that is not an accident." His jaw tightened once. "I dealt with the people responsible, but some things cannot be undone by dealing with people." Lara thought about the dress shirt, the folded paper, the practiced phone number. "He's been preparing," she said, "in case something happened." Dorian looked at her. "He told you that?" "He didn't have to." A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, just full. "I want to make you an offer," Dorian said. "I want you to hear it fully before you answer." "I'm listening." "I need someone for Mateo. Not a guard, not a nanny in the traditional sense. Someone who can be present in the ways my people are not equipped to be. Someone who can tell me when his silence means fear versus when it means he is simply reading. Someone who sees him as a child and not as a liability or an asset." His eyes met hers. Someone who would kneel on a parking lot in November and hold a stranger's child until his father arrived. Lara looked at her hands. The detergent burns had mostly faded. "You don't know anything about me," she said. "I know your name, your address, your employment history, for the last 6 years your credit report, the name of the man who defrauded you in 2021, and the fact that you filed an overtime complaint at Whitmore last month." He said it without apology. "I know you haven't called anyone to tell them where you are tonight, which means there is no one waiting. I know that your supervisor reduced your hours this week and that it was retaliatory." Her face went hot. "That is an extraordinary invasion of—" "Yes, no excuse, just the word. My son was alone behind a hospital for 40 minutes. I needed to know who you were." The fire cracked. Lara looked at it. "What would I be doing?" she asked. "Specifically, present when I cannot be, which is often." Something in his voice shifted, just slightly. "I am not an easy man to work for. I keep difficult hours. I make decisions that require people around me to ask no questions. But Mateo is not part of that world, and I will not allow him to become part of it. What happens inside these walls between you and my son is entirely separate." She looked at the door through which the boy had disappeared, thought about the book he'd been reading, thought about his fingers on her sleeve. "What would I be paid?" he told her. She didn't react, because she had learned a long time ago not to react when the number was the kind that changed the shape of your future. But she felt it move through her, that number, like hot water after a long cold. "I would need my own space," she said. "I won't share a floor with your security staff. There is a room beside Mateo's. It has its own entrance from the hall. I would need to be able to leave. I won't be a prisoner here. You may come and go as you choose. Within security protocols, I would explain. If I see something that concerns me about Mateo's well-being, I need to be able to tell you directly, without going through Crane or anyone else." Dorian's chin dipped. "Agreed." She crossed her arms. "I want to talk to him first. Mateo. Alone." He looked at her for a moment. Then he walked to the door and opened it without calling. Mateo appeared almost immediately, as if he had been sitting just on the other side of it. Dorian left without being asked. That surprised her. Mateo climbed back onto the sofa and looked at her with those eyes that were very old in a very young face. "Are you going to stay?" he asked. "I don't know yet." She sat beside him. "Tell me about school." He made a face. "I don't go to school." "Why not?" "Daddy says crowds are complicated." She looked at him carefully. "Do you wish you did?" He considered this with the seriousness of a child who took every question at face value. "I want to go to a place where there are other kids," he said. "Not necessarily school specifically, but a place." He picked at the edge of his blanket. "Last year I saw a documentary about a science fair, where kids make volcanoes and things. I've been thinking about it since. That was a year ago." "I think about things for a long time," he said simply. Lara looked at this boy, who practiced phone numbers until they were muscle memory, and kept dress shirts ironed and thought about science fairs for a year without anyone asking him about it. Something in her chest made a decision that her brain was still catching up to. "I'm going to ask you one more thing," she said, "and I need you to answer honestly." He nodded. Are you happy? He thought about it. I am less happy than I think I could be, he said. But I'm also not unhappy. Daddy loves me very much. I know that the way I know things that don't need to be proven. She exhaled. Okay, she said. Okay, you'll stay? I'll stay tonight, and then we'll talk more. He smiled, and it was a small smile, carefully given, which made it mean more than the wide kind. She stayed. Not because of the money, though the money let her breathe in a way she hadn't in years. Not because Dorian Call asked her to, though she would come to understand that his asking meant something in a world where he rarely did. She stayed because of the science fair. The room beside Mateo's had a window seat and bookshelves that had been empty long enough to gather a kind of patient dust, as if they had been waiting. Crane showed her the emergency protocols on her first morning, and she learned them without being told twice. Dr. Falk taught her what to watch for with Mateo's health, a mild arrhythmia that had been monitored since birth, nothing serious but requiring attention. She learned the house. The fourth floor was Dorian's, and she was not to go there unless invited. The third floor held Mateo's rooms, her room, Dr. Falk's office, and a library that Mateo could access anytime he wanted, which was frequently. The second floor held staff quarters and meeting rooms and a kitchen that produced better food than any restaurant she had eaten in, operated by a woman named Mrs. Galt who communicated primarily through plates of food left outside doors. The first morning, a plate appeared outside Laura's door. Eggs, toast, a cup of actual good coffee, a note in Mrs. Galt's hand. You look like someone who skips breakfast. Laura ate standing up, looking out the window at the harbor, and for the first time in longer than she could track, she didn't calculate whether she could afford the food she was eating. Mateo arrived at her door at 7:45, with his own breakfast balanced on a tray, and the announcement that he wanted to show her his laboratory. It was, in fact, a storage room on the third floor that had been converted into a workspace, with a long table and a microscope that looked more expensive than Laura's car. On the table sat the beginnings of a baking soda and vinegar volcano, approximately 14 months in the making. I've been refining the ratio, Mateo said seriously. The first 11 prototypes had structural issues. 12 prototypes of a volcano, Laura said. 13 now. He looked at her. Do you know anything about chemical reactions? Some. I took 2 years of chemistry before I had to leave school. He looked at her with sudden intense focus. Why did you have to leave? She picked up a notebook from the table, flipping through his small, precise handwriting. Money, she said. Sometimes life costs more than you have. He absorbed this. That seems unfair. It is. Daddy has money, he said. I know. He gave some to the children's hospital last year. Anonymously, he paused. It wasn't entirely anonymous. He just didn't want anyone to make a speech about it. Laura looked at the window, across the rooftops toward the water. Tell me about Prototype 13. Dorian Call was not often present. This was the first thing she learned about him that she hadn't already guessed. He left before Mateo woke most mornings. He returned after dark. Sometimes not at all. Crane did not explain his absences, and Laura didn't ask. But he was home more than she expected. Twice in the first week she found him in the library at midnight when Mateo had gone to sleep, standing at the shelves with a glass he wasn't drinking. The first time she apologized for interrupting and left. The second time she took a book from the shelf across from him and sat in the chair by the lamp and read because she was tired and the chair was comfortable and the library was warm. He didn't send her away. By the end of the third week they had a habit, which neither of them named. She would come to the library around 11. He was usually already there. They did not always talk. Sometimes they did, in the careful way of two people who had both learned that conversation was a territory that could be misread. Mateo wants to go to a science fair, she said one evening. Dorian looked up from the document in his hand. I'm aware. He's been aware for over a year. He hasn't asked you directly. He knows my concerns. He shouldn't have to know your concerns. He's 6. The room held the quiet of the house at night. Somewhere below, a door closed softly. The people who killed Elena, Dorian said, did so because she was visible. She attended events. She had a name attached to a face, attached to a schedule. His voice was level. I have done things since then that made new enemies in the process of eliminating old ones. Mateo's face is not in any database. His name is not on any enrollment form. I would like to keep it that way. Laura set down her book. I understand that. I do. She looked at him. But a child who is kept safe from the world grows up without it, and eventually the world arrives anyway, whether you've prepared him or not. Dorian said nothing. He's making a volcano, she continued. He has been working on it for over a year, alone, with no one to show it to. He doesn't complain. He doesn't ask for much. But he told me in the first hour I met him that he wants to be somewhere with other kids, and he's been waiting so long to say it out loud that he said it to a stranger in a parking lot. The fire moved. Dorian closed the document. There are controlled environments, he said finally. It was not agreement. It was the sound of a wall deciding whether to move. Yes, she said. There are. He looked at her for a long moment. You are not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone easier to dismiss. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her, and she understood it was not a compliment and not an insult, just a fact from a man who dealt in facts. I'll take that, she said, and picked up her book. The trouble found them on a Sunday. It arrived the way trouble did in that house, not loudly. Crane's manner changed before anything else, a slight recalibration, the kind that predated problems. Lara noticed it during Mateo's lunch. Crane passed the dining room door twice without entering, which he never did. That night Dorian came home in the middle of the afternoon. He went directly to the 4th floor. An hour later she heard voices she didn't recognize. Mateo was doing a geography puzzle in the library, working steadily, and Lara sat beside him and listened to the sounds of the house shift around them. Lara, he said without looking up, placing Uruguay with precision. Is something wrong? I don't know yet. He considered this. Daddy gets very quiet when something's wrong. It's the same quiet but different from normal quiet. He looked up. Does that make sense? Yes. He returned to the puzzle. You won't leave, he said. Not a question. No, okay. He found Argentina. I didn't leave either, in the parking lot. I kept thinking I should walk further and find someone else, but I sat down instead. He fitted the piece into place. I think I was waiting for you, but I didn't know it yet. Lara's throat tightened. Crane appeared in the doorway. He looked at her, a look with a specific weight to it. She excused herself. In the hallway, he said quietly, There's a man named Vance Rourke. He's been asking about the boy. The name meant nothing to her. His expression told her it should mean something. Who is he? Someone who believes Mr. Call made a mistake 6 years ago and has been looking for a way to demonstrate it. Crane's eyes were steady. He found out Mateo left the property. We don't yet know how. The dress shirt, the parking lot, 40 minutes. Mateo got out through the service entrance, she said. A delivery van. We know. The driver didn't see him. No fault. A pause. Rourke didn't follow Mateo. We believe he already had surveillance on the hospital perimeter. He saw the pickup. He saw you. Lara felt the cold reach her even in the warm hallway. He knows my name. He knows a woman called from a Whitmore number and that Mr. Call arrived within 4 minutes. Crane's jaw tightened. He doesn't yet know you're here. When he finds out, you become visible in a way that is not good. She looked toward the library door. What does Dorian want to do? Mr. Call is currently deciding. A pause. He would like to speak with you. She followed Crane to the 4th floor. She had not been here before. The staircase was narrower, the carpet darker. The room Crane brought her to was a study twice the size of the one downstairs, with windows overlooking the water, and a desk covered in things she understood she was not meant to read. Dorian stood at the window with his back to her. He didn't turn immediately. She waited. I'm going to ask you to leave, he said. Temporarily, there is a place we use, safe, comfortable, outside the city. You and Mateo, you're not coming. I have matters here to address. She crossed the room until she stood beside him, not behind him, and looked at the harbor below. The water was slate gray. A container ship moved in slow silence. Rourke, she said, tell me. Dorian was quiet for a moment. He was someone I trusted once, briefly. He used that trust to position himself, and when he was done using it, he moved against me. I responded. He survived it when he shouldn't have, and has spent the last 4 years deciding it was not over. Is it over? It will be. She looked at him. I'm not asking you to spare him. Something moved across his face. No? I'm asking you to be alive when Mateo wakes up. She held his gaze. He memorized your phone number when he was 4 years old. I want you to understand what that means. It means he's been prepared since he was 4 to be alone. You gave him a tool for the worst case. He wants different case. He wants an ordinary Tuesday. Dorian's expression shifted in a way she had started to recognize. A fracture in the control, brief and deep. He deserves that, she said. But so do you. The room held still. I will be here, he said, and his voice was different now. She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure why. They moved Mateo to a house 20 miles north, older, quieter, a property with high hedges and a woman named Mrs. Doran who baked bread and asked no questions. 2 guards, unobtrusive, no sign of danger from the outside. Mateo spent the first day rearranging the guest room to his satisfaction, and the second setting up a temporary version of his laboratory on the kitchen table, which Mrs. Doran accepted with minimal comment and maximal patience. Lara stayed close. She read to him at night because he asked. and they were working through a natural history encyclopedia that was almost certainly too advanced for a 6-year-old, and which he absorbed without apparent difficulty. He asked questions that made her go back and read the section again. He fell asleep with the book still open between them. On the third night, she heard a sound in the hall at 2 in the morning. She was out of her room before she fully woke. The hallway was dark except for the lamp at the far end, and in its light stood Dorian Call, coat damp from outside, face carrying the expression of a man who had done something he was still processing. Mateo's door was closed, breathing audible through the crack, asleep. Dorian looked at her. She looked at him. "It's done," he said. She exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding a breath for 3 days. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head. "Come in," she said, because the hallway was cold and he looked like a man who had not sat down in a long time. He sat in the chair by the window. She sat on the edge of the bed with the natural history encyclopedia still open beside her. Outside, the hedges moved in a wind she couldn't hear through the glass. "He'll sleep until 7, she said. "He's been doing the puzzle book I brought. He finished the level 9 and invented level 10 himself." Dorian's chin dropped briefly to his chest. "He built a volcano that actually works," she said. "Number 13, we tested it this afternoon." Mrs. Doran documented it on her phone without being asked. I think she cried a little. Dorian put one hand over his face. She thought for a moment that he might be crying. She looked away, at the window, at the dark hedges. When he lowered his hand, his eyes were dry, but the look in them was not something she had a clean category for. "Lara," he said. "You can thank me in the morning," she said, "when Mateo can hear it." He looked at her for a long moment, then something that had been held in his face for weeks loosened by 1 degree. "He calls you the Finder," Dorian said. She blinked. "What?" he said. "When Elena died, he didn't understand where she went. He asked me once where people go when they disappear." He looked at the window. "I told him that sometimes people find other people and that's where they go, that they belong to the people who find them." His voice was careful. "He told me last week that you are the Finder, that you found him in the parking lot. He said he wasn't lost before, he was just waiting to be found." The lamp hummed. The hedges moved. Lara looked at the open book beside her, at a page about migratory voice, for a moment. "He also told me," Dorian said quietly, "that you haven't called anyone since you came. No family, no friends." "I have some of both," she said, "just not the kind you call at 2 in the morning." "You could call me," he said, "if something happened. With Mateo, I know, or otherwise." He stopped. The words sat in the room. He looked like a man who had said something he had not planned to say and was deciding whether to retrieve it. She didn't let him. "Otherwise," she said, "yes, all right." He looked at her. In the lamplight, the lines of his face were different. Less like a room that had been cleaned after something went wrong. More like a room where someone had opened the windows. She went back to her room at 3. She did not sleep for a while after that. In the morning, Mateo appeared in the kitchen wearing mismatched socks and the expression of a child who had slept 10 hours and had opinions about breakfast. He stopped when he saw his father at the table and stood very still for 1 second, reading him the way he read everything, and then crossed the kitchen and leaned against his arm. "You stayed," Mateo said. "I said I would." "I know." He sat. Mrs. Doran put a plate in front of him. He looked at Lara. "Can we do the volcano today? The full version. Outside." "There's a field behind the hedge," she said. I asked Mrs. Doran. "It's flat." He nodded with the gravity of a scientist approving a location. "Good. We'll need the baking soda from the cabinet. And the food coloring, red?" she asked. "Obviously red." Dorian looked between them. Something settled in his face. Something quieter and more durable. "I'll carry the volcano," he said. Mateo looked at him with raised eyebrows. "Have you ever participated in a scientific demonstration?" "Not intentionally. We'll teach you," Mateo said with complete confidence and returned to his eggs. The field was cold and damp with morning frost, and Mateo narrated the entire setup like a documentary host who had been waiting a year for a camera. Dorian carried the volcano with the care of a man transporting something irreplaceable. Mrs. Doran filmed on her phone. Crane stood at the field's edge looking at the middle distance, which was as close as he came to celebration. When the baking soda met the vinegar and the red foam spilled down the sides of prototype 13, Mateo threw both fists in the air with the full-body joy of a child who has proven something. He turned to his father, face open and bright. "Did you see?" Dorian was already looking at him. "I saw," he said. Later, Lara would not be able to describe what it looked like, exactly. She would only be able to say that it looked like a man remembering something he had been afraid to want. They went home a week later. The house in Fells Point was the same brick, same gate, same Mrs. Galt appearing with plates nobody had requested. But something had shifted in it, the way rooms shifted after difficult things had passed it through and left the air cleaner. Dorian enrolled Mateo in a small science program 3 mornings a week. Private, carefully screened no more than 8 children. Mateo arrived the first day with a handout about volcanic geology that he had prepared himself, apparently for the other students, whether they wanted it or not. He came home talking faster than Lara had ever heard him. "There is a girl named Yolanda," he announced at dinner, "who has already built a working circuit board. I think she might be more advanced than me in electrical engineering, but I am more advanced in chemistry, so it's a reasonable partnership." Dorian said, "You asked her about a partnership?" "Obviously." He considered. "She said maybe, which I believe is a yes." Lara covered her mouth. Dorian looked at his son and then looked at the ceiling briefly, and she was almost certain he was keeping something private. That night she found him in the library. She came in and took the chair across from his without speaking. The fire was lower tonight, and outside the November wind had finally turned into the kind that meant it was serious about winter. He looked at her over the cover of whatever he was reading, which she had learned by now was mostly a prop. "Mateo mentioned," he said, "that you left school for money reasons." She looked at the fire. "I did. What were you studying? Biochemistry, 2nd year." She pulled the blanket from the arm of the chair. "My mother got sick. The bills were. I made choices. I don't regret them." "Do you miss it?" She thought about it honestly. "I miss what I was going to become," she said. "Not the version of me that exists, the one that kept going." He was quiet for a moment. "She recovered, your mother?" "She did. She lives in Delaware. We talk on Sundays." "You should tell me these things," he said. "Not because I need to know. Because—" He paused, and she had the sense he was choosing words from a vocabulary he didn't often use. "I want to." She looked at him. "I know what's in your file," he said. "I don't know what's in your head when you look at the harbor in the morning." She turned this over. "I'm thinking about whether it would be worth applying somewhere. Going back." She looked at the window. "Whether it's too late, it isn't. You don't know that?" "No," he said, "but I know what it looks like when something is actually too late. This doesn't look like it." The fire cracked. Somewhere Mateo slept with his notes about Yolanda's circuit board and his printout about the regional science fair in April and his 2 good shoes on the floor beside his bed. Dorian set down his book. He looked at her with the directness she had come to understand was not coldness but its opposite. A man who had learned to mean what he did and did not waste gestures. "I would like you to stay," he said. "Not as an employee. I mean," his jaw worked briefly, "not only that." She looked at him for a long moment. "You are not an easy man," she said. "No, your life is complicated in ways that require people around you to ask no questions, yes." He held her gaze. "But I am asking you a question that is different from what I usually do." She looked at the fire, at the books, at the harbor light coming through the gap in the curtain where she had never bothered to close it all the way. "I know," she said. "I noticed." She reached across and took the book from his hands, which were very still, and set it on the side table. "Mateo needs a science fair," she said. "You need to sleep before midnight at least twice a week. Mrs. Galt needs someone to actually say thank you when the plates appear." She looked at him. "And I need the version of myself that kept going. I'd like to find her from here, if that's all right with you." Something in him loosened completely. "Yes," he said. "From here." He reached for her hand carefully, as if this were a thing he was not entirely certain he was allowed to have, and she let him take it. The winter settled around the house on Fells Point. Mateo won 2nd place at the regional science fair in April, behind Yolanda and her circuit board, which he declared was completely fair and also the beginning of a very productive rivalry. Dorian attended and stood in the back of the gymnasium in a suit that cost more than the building's monthly utilities, and applauded until Crane told him quietly to perhaps moderate, and he did not moderate. Lara enrolled in an evening biochemistry program at Hopkins in the spring. She told Mateo first, he said obviously, with the tone of a person who had simply been waiting for confirmation. The house was louder than it had been. Not reckless. Dorian Call did not become a different man overnight, and the harbor still held its gray, serious water, and Crane still stood at the edge of things with the look of someone counting exits. But dinner moved from the formal dining room to the kitchen most nights. Mrs. Galt stopped leaving plates outside doors, and started handing them directly to people, which meant she'd decided they were real. Mateo and Yolanda's partnership produced a working weather station that Mateo installed on the rooftop without asking permission, and which Dorian discovered and said nothing about, which was its own kind of answer. One Sunday afternoon, Laura stood at the harbor window on the third floor with a biochemistry textbook open in her hands and the sound of Matteo explaining barometric pressure to his father drifting up kitchen below. She had called from the kitchen below. She had called her mother that morning, in the careful way of a woman who paid attention to voices if Laura was happy. Laura had been quiet for a moment, not the kind of quiet that meant she didn't know, the kind that meant the answer was bigger than she'd expected, and she needed a second to make sure she held it right. Yes, she'd said, and she had meant it.